or npm install certain things you want your system to be ready to execute those automation, it's very difficult to have this freestyle job and get it working. So these are some of the challenges that we are seeing with the freestyle jobs. Apart from that, the next point that we see is the integration with the development team's deployment pipeline. So typically, we have our QA Jenkins instance separate, or it could be the same as the development teams. So in case you have a jobs as a freestyle job, integrating them with your development team's pipeline is really difficult if you have it in the freestyle job. Let's say you have two different instances. One is which the developers are using for deploying their code, and another one in which you're deploying your automation suite. You can trigger them, but in case they want to integrate these two jobs based on the couple of triggers, let's say commit certain code and they want their jobs to be triggered. So it is difficult to do it with the freestyle jobs. It could be done, but it's slightly difficult. The next thing that I would like to discuss is about the QA Jenkins migration. So recently, we faced this one of the issues wherein we had to upgrade the rel machine on which our Jenkins VM was present. So there were a couple of security patches that we had to upgrade. For that, we had to move our Jenkins, all the jobs from one VM to another VM. So typically what we did was like, we copied all our Jenkins folders with the jobs and all those files. So doing this, it will work on your new Jenkins box, but there are a couple of problems. Let's say the latest Jenkins or the latest VMs might not support well the couple of jobs, the couple of dependencies which you are expecting for the earlier Jenkins to support. They might not be present on the new Jenkins box because your entire job is into the freestyle job and you haven't mentioned what are the dependencies that you need. So that is where we have seen whenever you're migrating your jobs from one VM to another VM, freestyle jobs give a lot of problems because of the versions or the jobs not getting properly copied, or that could be the access credential issues for the jobs. The folders which you're moving might not have the right access right. So these are the couple of issues. Apart from that, when you're running your basic freestyle job, you don't have an ability to stop the job in between. You cannot stop it once it started. You cannot stop it in between and give certain inputs to make sure that it runs. And it takes certain input from the user and then it is deploying to the new stage. Let's say if I want my automation to run it on QA, I will wait for some inputs from the testers or the developers, and based on that, those inputs, it will run onto the stage. Let's say if I want to approve it or reject it to run it on QA stage, that kind of ability is missing with the basic vanilla freestyle jobs. So to get rid of all these problems, at least some of those problems, I'm sure that most of you must have already seen these issues. You must be able to relate to some of these issues. So to get rid of all these issues, or at least to minimize the impact of all of these issues, the answer to this is like the Jenkins pipeline. So we'll just go by the definition what exactly this Jenkins pipeline is. So if you see by definition, it says the pipeline is a collection of events or jobs which are interlinked and which run in a sequence. So it could run in a sequence or they could run in parallel. Again, it's a combination of the plugins that support integration and deployment in the continuous delivery pipeline. So that's a basic definition of the Jenkins pipeline. So if you see the diagram just below the definition, if you see a pipeline or the typical process in the world, wherein the developers commit their code. If the test cases, all the unit test cases pass, then the build is successful. The build is then deployed to your test environment, stage environment, or any other pre-prod environment that you have. And then finally, it goes to the production environment. So if I want to add my test cases, UAT test cases, smoke test cases, smoke or sanity, any of the test cases in between each of this stage, it's difficult to do it using the basic freestyle jobs, because this is the entire pipeline and I'm not sure like how to integrate this. And let's say if the VM that I'm using for the freestyle jobs doesn't support the pipeline which is already been existing. So these are the challenges that we would like to solve using the Jenkins pipeline. All right. And this is the important slide wherein we'll talk about why do we need a Jenkins pipeline. So basically, Jenkins pipeline is nothing but a simple file in which you write all your steps, right from the pulling your code, take a code from your Git repository, then deploying on to your any of the Jenkins VM. Let's say you have configured your Jenkins in the master and slave environment, or you configured your Jenkins such a way that it runs on the Docker machine. So you're pulling your basically you're pulling your all the test repository from Git, GitHub, or any of the SCM, and then you would put it into deploy it into Docker, and then finally you'll be publishing the reports, and finally you might send the email reports. That is the typical things written into the Jenkins pipeline. So it is basically a Jenkins file which we push into the SCM. SCM could be your Git, GitHub, or any of the repository services that you have. So it's basically a Jenkins file which we can use it into the GitHub. Second advantage that we see using a Jenkins pipeline as a Jenkins file is that it gives you a single source of pipeline. Like since we have this Jenkins file in your Git repository, multiple developers or the multiple automation developers can start contributing to your pipeline. Generally, when we have this freestyle jobs, we do not like the single person has an ability to make, or single or couple of people have an ability to make the changes to your freestyle jobs. Only people having the appropriate access can make the changes, and rest of the folks might have to request them to make those changes in the job. But that's not case with the Jenkins pipeline. Since your entire job or the entire file is into the GitHub, now you can go and check what exactly the steps have been happening and make the changes. If you want to suggest something, you can raise a PR against those pipeline and get it reviewed. That is the second point. Third point that I would like to talk about is audit trail. Since now your Jenkins file is a part of your Git and GitHub repository, all the PRs that you're going to make against the Jenkins file is visible to the developers. You can get it approved and then get it deployed. Let's say if you make certain changes to your Jenkins file and it starts failing your job, there is no way you can revert into the facial jobs. But in the Jenkins pipeline, you can check which is the PR which is causing this failure, and you can revert back to the original version which it was working. So this is a really good advantage. This comes into handy whenever you have a really big jobs. There are a couple of dependent jobs, and your jobs are pretty complicated or complex. So this really comes handy. Okay. Apart from that, pausing and starting the pipelines for the user inputs. So this is the point which I earlier mentioned was like, let's say if you want to approve or reject your code, or your, let's say there is a simple pipeline in which the code is deployed, and then based on the user's approval, you want your code to deploy on QA stage or next to the stages. So Jenkins pipeline gives you an ability to take the user's input during its execution. So it will deploy your code onto QA environment. It will wait for the user's input to approve or reject it. In case he approves it, it will go and deploy to the stage environment. In case he rejects it, it will still stay. It will just close the pipeline. It won't execute further. So this is the ability that we have with the Jenkins pipeline, taking the user's input. Apart from that, easily accommodating the complex pipelines. So for this, the simple example for the QAs is like, let's say if you have two jobs, the one job is running your API suite. It's running all your APIs, the basic sanity test for APIs. And based on the success and failures of your API, you want your UI test to pass. I mean, this succeed, or rather they run parallelly or after your API suite has run. So having this kind of different jobs integrated in the freestyle job is slightly complicated. Here, typically, you would have to write two different jobs, two separate freestyle jobs, and then integrate them based on the success and failure. But this entire complex pipeline could be built using the Jenkins pipeline quite easily. So there are a couple of tags that we have, or the syntax that we have is like loops, forks, then. So these are the different syntax which we'll be talking in the upcoming slides. So these typical tags will help you to write all the complex pipelines. Apart from that, easy restoration during the Jenkins migration, the point which I mentioned as a challenge in earlier slide, this is quite easily possible with the Jenkins pipeline. Let's say your Jenkins instances goes away, or you just lost your Jenkins instance because of some outage or network issues. Restoring, let's say you have a new VM now, restoring all your jobs shouldn't be a problem now, because all your repository, all your jobs are not present in the Jenkins, but they're present in your GitHub repository. And you can simply run your Jenkins all over again without any issues. And the last point, that is resilient to the unplanned restarts. During, let's say if you're trying to run your entire job and there is some issue with a network issue, let's say there are a couple of 4 stages in your job wherein you're cloning your repository and then you started your execution, but it failed. at the report stage while it was trying to publish the report, or it failed during the time when it was trying to send the email after the report. Um, in case of freestyle, you would have to run all your jobs all over again. You have to run it right from the beginning. But that's not the case with the Jenkins pipeline. You can specifically run that particular step, and you can skip all the earlier stages. So that is these are the basic slides that I want to highlight about the why and what about the Jenkins pipeline. I'll hand it to Anisha for the syntax and the next slides. Over to you, Anisha.
Thanks, Swapnil. So I hope you all have a fair idea by now what is Jenkins Pipeline and why are we using it? Why do we need to use Jenkins Pipeline? So talking about the two basics, so we are talking here about a couple of pipeline concepts. We are referring to pipeline as code, which is nothing uh, but the definition of a Jenkins pipeline, like how you put that into using your pipeline specific DSL syntax into a Jenkins file. A Jenkins file is basically a text file. And when we are talking about the pipeline specific DSL syntax, there are two types of DSL syntax. One is declarative, another is scripted. We are going to be talking about these two different syntaxes in the next slide. Talking about a couple of the key aspects of Jenkins pipeline, we go one by one. The first is pipeline. A pipeline is a user-defined model of a continuous deployment delivery pipeline. It's basically the entire build process put into a Jenkins file. Now, if we talk about pipeline, it's a key part in a declarative pipeline syntax. Coming on to the next one is a node. Node is a machine which is a part of the Jenkins environment and is capable of executing the pipeline. Now, this this is the key part of a scripted pipeline syntax. Now, when we say the key part, it means that the pipeline and the node, if you do not use these two keywords, these two DSLs in your Jenkins file, your Jenkins will not be able to allocate the executors and the workspaces required to execute your Jenkins job. So whichever syntax you decide to use, you will have to use these two keywords based on whichever is going to specify your Jenkins file. Coming on to the next one, stage. A stage is a block that defines a conceptually distinct subset of tasks performed through the entire pipeline. Let's say we have a couple of tasks in our Jenkins file. If you want to build a particular job or if you want to build a particular image, there are a couple of steps that would be involved. So the subset of those tasks will be tagged as a stage. You'll call that a stage. Now, this is something the build, test, and deploy stages. These are something that are very specific um, to an entire pipeline of a product, right? Where you're building an application, testing it, and then deploying it. Let's say we are not talking about the entire end-to-end pipeline, and we are only concerned about our tests that we want to integrate with Jenkins as a part of the CI. Then probably we could have stages like initialize the test, execute the test, and then have some post actions which might do some clean up workspaces or maybe trigger some emails or maybe archive some reports in some of those stages. Now coming on to the next one is a step. A step is a single task. So every stage is compiled of different steps. When we talk about a step, it's nothing but a single task. It's basically wherein it tells Jenkins what to do at a particular point in time. Let's say you want to run your test, so that would be a particular step in your Jenkins file. Next slide, Swapnil. Okay, so now that we talked about the basic pipeline concepts and we have an understanding of what a Jenkins file is and what are the basic blocks that it comprises of, the key concepts are clear. We're moving on to the Jenkins syntax. Like I mentioned, the Jenkins file can be written using two types of syntax. One is declarative and another is scriptive. So the declarative syntax is more of a recent feature added to the Jenkins pipeline, wherein it's more easier to read and write, and it provides more syntactical features. The features are more richer than the scripted. And we already mentioned like what are the key differences there. how we use the pipeline and how we use it as a node in declarative versus scripted. In this session, we are mainly going to be talking about the declarative pipeline syntax. Even we are going to be following those as a part of our demo. Next slide. Okay, so here is a key difference between these two. So if you notice something very closely, the stages and the steps are the parts of the pipeline which are common to both the syntaxes, right? And on the left, if you see, we have the first word is pipeline, right? Which means that this is the keyword that needs to be used as a part of the declarative pipeline DSL syntax. The next is the agent. Agent is nothing but agent specifies that which node on your Jenkins. Let's say you have multiple nodes, you have multiple nodes on your Jenkins in your Jenkins configuration, and you have labels attached to those. So you would like to specify that you know which node you want to run your Jenkins job on. So when you say agent, you pick you specify that this was the agent for if we write any, it would pick up any of the available executors and execute your job. Coming on to the stages, you can see the stages is build, test, and deploy. And inside that, there are steps. And similarly, it's the case with the Jenkins file syntax for scripted pipeline on the right, which is node, followed by different stages of build, test, and deploy. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a brief about how a pipeline would look like. How would you actually write a pipeline in when we talk about just the QE workflow? Let's say we are only considering the QE workflow. So at the first line, you see again pipeline followed by agents. Now we have triggers. So there are a lot of helper methods available with the Jenkins pipeline that allow you to perform each and every operation that you would do as a part of a freestyle job or as a part of the Jenkins UI dashboard. So you perform the triggers here. Let's say you want to run your job every day. I want to run my job on 5 days of the week, every day at 10 a.m. so that whenever I log in the morning, I have my reports for the test automation suite. Coming on to next, like I mentioned, you can always specify the stages. The stages can be checkout repository. The stage one steps can be, which are which is the repository that you want to check out. So I specified a path to the repository that I want to use for my test that consists of my API test. Then followed by the next stage, you see the steps inside there, and then you have an sh. Sh is nothing but the shell command that I would like to run in order to run my test, which is nothing but more of creating environment, activating environment, installing all the dependencies, and then finally executing the test. And finally, you see a post section at the bottom, which is kind of archiving all the artifacts available to us. So this is kind of a very brief and a very short Jenkins file that we could use as a sample in order to just demo how one can actually get started with writing a Jenkins pipeline. And we will be covering a lot more in the demo as well. Next slide. Okay, so all right, so it's time for the demo already. So we are going to be we have two parts to the demo. The first part is getting started with the pipelines. How do we use the web UI to write the pipeline, configuring the Selenium Java repo and publishing the TestNG reports and having a look at those. And second would be configuring your Jenkins job for API tests with Jenkinsfile. In this, we will be checking our Jenkinsfile into our source control repository. We are going to take a look at how we can parameterize the job, add stages, publish reports, and trigger some emails. So I hope everybody is clear with the with the concepts of Jenkins pipeline. And we will be going through the demo. So is there anybody on the call who has a Jenkins instance ready with them and would like to follow along with us or would like to try a couple of steps as we go along with the demo? Or we can go with the demo at our own pace. Please feel free to unmute and let us know. Or maybe drop in the chat that you will be following along. So if you are following along, we'll keep the pace of our demo slightly slower. But if not, we'll go on our own pace so that you can follow along. Okay, so we have one response from Shoaib saying he has Jenkins installed in system. One more. Okay, so we have two people who have the Jenkins server ready. I think Swapnil, you can start the demo and people can follow along. And if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask us.
Okay. All right, guys. So, okay, let's get started with the first demo then. Let me unshare this. Okay. So typically, I'll be using this repository for our demo purpose. So it is under the test row repository. I'll let Anisha and Deepak talk more about this repository. What exactly is the repository? How you can contribute to this repository? What is the purpose of this repository? Deepak will be telling you more about them, or Anisha. So under this repository, I have the Selenium TestNG Maven repository. This is a pretty simple repository that we have, a vanilla one, which consists of Selenium TestNG Maven. And what exactly it does is like it will simply open the Google browser and check, it will open a browser, Chrome browser in the headless mode, and it will check whether the couple of elements are present or not. That's a simple test case we would be executing. Let's see if I can show that test case. So this is a sample test case that we have, and this is what we'll be executing as a part of this demo. And then we'll be having the TestNG reports, which we can see how exactly they look like. Okay. All right. So for that, first of all, I've created the sample freestyle project that we have. Okay. It's logged out. Let me log in again. All right. So this is the typical freestyle job that we have. This is the typical freestyle jobs that we have. It's like the Selenium, it's a freestyle job. Here I'm discarding the old builds and I'm simply pulling it from the GitHub repository. This is the repository that I'm using, Selenium TestNG Maven. This is the SCM, and I'll be pulling the main branch. This is where I'm specifying my branch. I've kept it simple, this freestyle job, and the focus is more on the pipeline. So I haven't added any of the build triggers. I'm just deleting the workspace before it starts. And I'll be invoking the Maven, basically these commands like clean, install, and test. And finally, we'll be having our post build script, like we'll be publishing our TestNG reports. So let's try to run it. This is a simple freestyle job, and we'll be converting the same job into a pipeline so that you will be able to relate what exactly changes you need to make in case you want to convert your freestyles to your pipeline jobs. Let's try to run it. So it has started executing. Let's see the console. All right, it has just started. That pulled the latest image. Okay, yep, it got executed. Since it's running into the headless mode, it's slightly quicker, but believe me, it's running. All right. So it took the latest build. It is running on this particular test, and the Chrome drive was successful. And these are the logs that we could see for the Jenkins. Let's see the reports. These are the typical TestNG reports that we see for the test cases. Sample here, we are just verifying the page title. All right. Now that we have seen the freestyle job for pulling the repository and executing it with the TestNG, let's try to convert the same job into the pipeline jobs. So this is where you'll have to select, generally we select the freestyle projects for any of the freestyle jobs. And here I'll be selecting the pipeline one. Okay. And then click on next. I'll keep this thing as blank. So testing pipeline job. Let's keep all of these things. You can add as per your project needs. You can discard the old builds. You can add a couple of things over here. And then finally, this is the important section that we would like to know more about. This is the pipeline. It presents you with this structure. This is where you can start writing your pipeline scripts. So there are two options that we see here. One is the pipeline script, and another is the pipeline script from SCM. So pipeline script with the SCM would be covered in the demo too. Right now, I'll be demoing you with the pipeline scripts. How can you can quickly write your pipeline script and get it executed. So for that, first thing, here's the option where you can get started. It will help you to get started with the pipeline. It will give you all the vanilla basic structure for your pipeline. So if you see, it has generated and auto-generated for the pipeline for all of the basic syntax. Let's say if I have a job which is having the GitHub and Maven, I'll have to simply install this, and it will generate all the basic steps for me. And then there is a scripted pipeline. Let's move back to the hello world. So couple of things which Anisha mentioned in our earlier jobs, we can see them, we can relate to them now, like the pipeline, agent is any, and stages. Had it been a scripted pipeline, it would have been something like this node, and then your entire script would have gone into this. But right now we are using the declarative style, using the Groovy, so that the basic structure will be like this. This is the declarative style of writing your scripts, so that it's easier. Like you don't have to worry about too many things. You just have to add a couple of stages to this pipeline. So agent any, as Anisha already explained, like here you can define in case you want to run your Jenkins on any or your jobs in any of the Docker instance, or any of them. In case you have the master and slave instance for your Jenkins, you can specify on which slave you want to execute your job on. This is where you can specify your agent. Right now, we'll be executing on the same instance. Then we have the different stages. The stage under stages, we have a couple of more stages. So let's try to see how they exactly look. I'll try to copy them. All is cloning the repository. Build. Finally, let's say we call it as a report. So what I've done is I'm simply echoing them all the steps. So we'll first see how they exactly look, and then we'll be filling in these stages. Let's apply. Let's try to run this. All right. So this is how it will look like, your clone, build, and repository. We haven't done anything as of now. We are just looking at how exactly these different stages would look like, and then now we'll start filling in those things into this repository. If you see under each of this stage, you can see the logs for them. The echo logs that we have seen, it's saying that cloning the repository. The next stage is building it, building the jobs, and the final one is the reporting. So all the ecosystem that we added there could be seen here. All right. Okay, now let's try to fill in the details for all the repository. Okay. Just to save the time, I have already written the pipeline. Let me paste that repository. I'll quickly walk you through the repository that we have. Sorry, the script that we have. So this is the typical script that we have. The first thing is the pipeline, which we already discussed. The agent is any. I'll be running it on the same VM on which my Jenkins is installed. The tools is section where you can mention all the tools that you need for running your job. It could be Maven, JDK. In case of AngularJS, you can mention the NPM version or anything that you want your job to be ready before your job starts executing. So these are the tools you can mention there. Then we have the stages. Under stages, we have different stages, different stage. So these are the different stages. The first stage is initialize, then cloning the repository, then I'm running the test, and then finally publishing the report. Initialize, I'm just trying to echo some of the paths of the M2 folder. Second thing, I'm trying to clone the repository. again from the GitHub repository. Since I'm not using any of the credentials, so I don't have to pass any credentials here. Had I been using any credentials, I could have configured it here itself, right upfront in the environment section or the credentials sections in the pipeline. Yes, sure. We'll be sharing the script. Yes. All right. So initialize, then cloning. So this is how we'll be cloning the repository, and then we are running the test. It's a simple shell script like mvn clean install, which will pull the repository and then run the POM file. And finally, we have the publish reports, which will simply generate, which will publish the TestNG XML reports. So let's see how it looks like. Let's try to run it. So I started cloning the repository. It has cloned successfully. Now it's trying to run the test. And it finally published the reports. So these are the different, let's see if the reports have been generated. Okay. Okay, the same reports which we saw with the freestyle jobs, you can see it here. Verify the sample test case. The test case has been executed. So a couple of things I would like to mention here is that, as I mentioned, you can add the user input at any of the stages. So let's assume that your repository has been cloned and you don't want your test case to run immediately. You can add an user input here, saying with a when clause, saying that I want my test case to stop, or I don't want published reports based on the user's approval. I want the reports to be published. I'm just giving an example. Generally, we want the reports to be published, but this is where you can add the a when clause, which, or rather the input clause, which will take the user's input, and based on that, the next stages in the pipeline would proceed. Another important thing, if you see in this pipeline is let me show that, is the restart from the stage. So all the stages that you saw, initialize, cloning the repository, run the test, and publish the reports. Let's say if I add one more step of email after the reports has been successful, I'm adding one more stage of emailing, and I don't want this entire test case to run. If my test case is taking typically 30 minutes, 20 minutes for entire execution, and all I'm interested in checking the reports. So you don't have to run this entire suite. You can simply start with the report or the stage which you want to execute, and you can simply run it. So only this part, it will quickly check all the repository and it will start from there. Okay. This is how it will check the declarative basic. It will check the structure and then it will publish the reports. So that's the basic structure of the pipeline. Another important thing that I would like to highlight is, since a couple of you might already be knowing this, but since you'll be starting writing your pipeline for the first time, these all syntax might quite be overwhelming. You might not know which syntax to use. In case you want to add, instead of TestNG results, you might want to add your Allure reports or any other reports. So for that, how should you get those things? Is you can use this pipeline syntax. This is really helpful. Simply click on this, and here you can see, let's say if I want to mail it, mail to Swapnil, and then you can write a subject as build report. Again, test report, and generate the pipeline script. So if you see, this is the script that has been generated. All I have to do is copy the script and paste it here to get it working. And then post this stage, your mail will be triggered. Also important thing about the post section is this is the tag which helps you to generate your reports. Let's say any of the stages fail. If you still want your reports to be generated, whether they pass or fail, the post section, we have an annotation with the always tag. So this tag will always run even if your steps pass or fail. Still your the post step will always run. This post step could be inside your stage, or it could be at the stage level as well. It could be at the steps level, or it could be at the stage. So let's say if I complete all my stages, and if I want them to execute post that, so I can simply copy this and paste it here. So it won't run inside the stage, but at the stages level. So that's the the basic script that we had for the part 1 of the demo. So yeah, Anisha, you can take up for the part 2, second part of the demo.
Okay, thanks, Swapnil. Um, Thanks, Swapnil, for the demo. And I think I'll share my screen. And is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Swapnil, for the quick demo. And I really hope that, all of you are have a fair understanding by now how one can create a pipeline, what a pipeline is, and why do we really need to create it. Going forward, I'm going to be covering a few more concepts on how we actually go ahead and check in that pipeline into our source code and what benefits does it bring along. So you just had a look at the Selenium TestNG repo, and we had a look at the reports and how that job would build. So going forward, I'm going to be using another repo. It's mainly a small repo which comprises of a couple of API tests using a framework called Lemon Cheesecake in Python. Okay, so talking about, so this is just the framework. If anybody wants to run through the test or run through the repository, it's right there. I already shared the link. If you all want, I can share the link again here also. For the repo, you all can run through the README steps and understand what's needed. I have specified all the test execution steps. If you haven't heard about this framework anytime, then probably this is where you might want to go ahead and take a look at how this framework helps in giving you really nice reports, trying to tell you everything about how your test went, and mentioning all the checks that you performed in your repository. Okay, coming back to how we can write a Jenkins file. So like Swapnil already mentioned that you could write a Jenkins file using the web UI. So the only difference is that, the best practice for writing Jenkins file is usually that you write your Jenkins file and check that code into your source control repository. Which way it kind of helps you in all those points that, Swapnil already mentioned at the start of the talk. Like it helps you in maintainable. It can be reviewed by anybody else, and then multiple people can collaborate on the pipeline. If somebody messes up with something, we all know you know where to look for it. So going step by step with the pipeline, this is fairly, I hope this is pretty much clear by now. Going forward, we have the triggers here, how I want to run my job. Now, this is something new. So usually we want to have a test job which we want to run against different environments. Like we want to have this option in our job wherein we configure the freestyle job using the Jenkins dashboard UI, and we want to trigger the job against a particular environment. So in order to do that, Jenkins Pipeline does provide you helper methods to set parameters like that. You can always set all your parameters, have a description, and have a name to the environment variable, which can further be used in your test as an environment variable itself. Coming on to the next one, we have the stages. The first stage is checking out the source code repository, which is just nothing but the link to the existing repository that I already shared in the chat. Second would be executing the API test. I want to execute my API test. In order to do that, I have all of these extra commands wherein I wanted to do some debug steps, knowing which directory I'm in, which are the files that are listed as a part of these directories. You can have these as a part of your pipeline or not have these. So any of the debug steps even that you're looking at, you can always add those into your file. Let's say Jenkins does not execute or tries to give you some errors. So there could be some issues with the paths that went wrong somewhere or the other. Coming on to the next, we have, we are setting up a virtual environment. We are activating the virtual environment. We are trying to install all the requirements that we have, and we are going to run all the tests. So this command will run all the tests. LCC stands for Lemon Cheesecake. If you are not aware about this framework, you might just want to go look for it. It's it's kind of similar to PyTest if that's something that you've already heard of, but it's fairly new and it's fairly uncommon, but it's a very promising framework. Going ahead with that, we have I just wanted to see even the reports on my console, so I just added a couple of other commands. These are again some shell commands that I added for debugging because Jenkins was not behaving as expected. So you can always remove those. Talking about the post step, like Swapnil mentioned, there can be two posts, right? You can have the post section as a part of the stage or after all the stages are done. So if you notice that, this post section is right after, is a part of the stages block. So this is something that I want to happen after, immediately after, my previous stages run. So I just want to archive all the artifacts that I have and I want to publish the HTML. Now we usually talk about that, we think that publishing HTML reports, we need to have a plugin installed on our Jenkins instance, which should be able to publish the HTML reports. And then the Jenkins pipeline provides us with all the helper methods which are needed to support those plugins. So this publish HTML directive here is nothing but is something that's provided by Jenkins pipeline in order for us to be able to use the Jenkins, be able to publish the repository. So we specify all the details as we would in the Jenkins UI in our text file here. So all the report titles, everything. Again, a couple of extra steps that I wanted to do as a part of this. Now, this is something that would happen on after all the stages are complete. This is a post section that would happen, and always is a directive that you can use based on if you say always, it would mean that this block of code would execute irrespective of the status of your code. Now we even talked about that, we'll be talking about a couple of global parameters that Jenkins pipeline would expose. So Jenkins pipeline exposes a lot of global parameters as well that you can use. So to name a few, let's say we have environment.job name. This will simply put out all the job names, your environment job name that it has. We have a build number. We have the build URL here, the environment.build URL. Again, the job number, current build, current result. So you can use all these environment variables directly as exposed by Jenkins. Now, going ahead with this. So let's go ahead. So you can have a look here. So if I am to just show you how it would look like, it would look like this. But if anybody is trying to follow along, we have the dashboard here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new item. We are going to create a Jenkins pipeline, pulling out all the code from the SCM right away. And let's say we do API test demo now. Okay, so here is what I enter my name. I select pipeline from here and I click on OK. Now I'm going to enter a slide description here. And like Swapnil used, pipeline script in the previous demo, wherein we wrote the pipeline script as a part of this web UI dashboard. I'm going to be using pipeline script from SCM, which is my source code management. Now I'm going to go ahead and select SCM as Git. Here I will enter my repository path, wherein my repository path is here. I'm going to copy this, go here, enter the repository path here. I don't have any credentials since this is a public repo here. Now this is the script path. Now the script path is nothing but it is trying to ask that which is the Jenkins file that you would want to add. So I go ahead and say Jenkins config here and I say Jenkins file and I click on save. And now I'm going to do a build now. So this will be pulling the actual code from there. Now it is building the job. So we see all the stages here, the declarative, checkout, and execute the API test here. Now, this one is likely to fail at this moment because we configured the job to run with parameters, but we haven't specified any parameters yet. So now when I refresh, I see the option for build with parameters. I go ahead, I click build with parameters. I select the environment that I want to build against. I select QA and I click on build. And now we will see that, all our tests will build and it will pass. Okay, so now all our tests have passed. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the build and see if we have all the reports. We did ask the Jenkins job to archive the reports for us. So we have the report here. Hopefully it should be visible. All right, so we have the report here with us, which is ready to view. We see that, what was the command that we were running, the start, end time, the number of tests that we ran. We kind of conducted 5 API tests. So the good part about this framework that I used, which is the lemon cheesecake here, is that it tries to list out all the checks that you're trying to perform, checking for this endpoint. What was the exact check that we tried to do? We just checked for a response 200. Okay, let's say we want to do perform more checks. We kind of expect the response to have the entry email that contains at the rate, and it would tell you like what were the exact checks that it got. So there are a couple of checks. It's more about the framework here. That is something that you can always read about the framework. You can always have all the info statements right into the reports. That's usually the thing that we are looking for in reporting for test reports, which kind of missing in most of the test frameworks that we kind of use, but it was available in this one. So this was pretty much about it. This is how you can actually configure your Jenkins job, and that's pretty much about it. So you can see your Jenkins job here, and you can go ahead. It's all done. Ever if you require to make any changes, all you need to do is check in code into your Jenkins file with all the changes here, and click on the build now, and it will pull all the changes to your Jenkins job based on the changes that you made in your Jenkins file. That's it from my side. I think we're pretty much on time. I hope you all were able to follow along.